Thank you for attending our presentation today. This is Dan Kinsey from Kinsey & Kinsey. We're going to be going through some of the applications we have developed for Lawson and for Landmark applications regarding security reporting, segregation of duties, auditing, and just some of the functionality we've built in that help our clients with their audit concerns. So we'll go through a list of risk and controls and things that our clients have come back to us and said this is what our auditors are looking for, and then we're going to jump into this actual product presentation so I can show you how some of this functionality works. So let's just start with a high-level overview of our applications, and we have 6 or 7 applications that do things within Lawson regarding security and monitoring of user activity. So for both the S3 and the Landmark apps, we'll have a full suite of reports for security reporting that'll give you your user access, at the role, security class, object level. It'll give you actor, role on the Landmark side. We also then do security modeling, specifically for the S3 product right now, that handles what-if scenarios. And if I want to build out simulations on changes to security and how that's going to impact my users, that's what our modeling application will do before you actually make any of the changes to security. Then on the security auditing side, we're looking at and tracking changes to the security model. So again, S3 or Landmark, any changes made to security at the user role level and all the way down to individual objects. So if you make a change on a rule, we want to capture those changes and actually be able to send out notifications on anything that's critical that might have been changed. Then we have an application for segregation of duties where we're delivering, it's about 250 policies that use about 2,500 rules to make sure that you have the right security settings and the checks and balances so that you cannot create fraudulent activity within the application. So, for example, we don't want somebody that can, start up a vendor, create a vendor, enter an invoice, and cut a check to that vendor. So we're trying to prevent that type of activity by having the correct security assignments. Then we get into our monitoring and auditing. So what these applications do is we actually look at activity within the Lawson applications and Landmark to see what our users are actually using and how they're using the system. The monitoring application tracks all activity for all users, and we're not doing the self-service activity because generally that activity is okay. We want users to be able to do that. It's really all the power users within Lawson, those users that are the back office users that are doing payables and HR payroll and those functions, and we want to track all their activity. And then if we're concerned about what the changes are that are being made, we'll go into transaction auditing, where we actually look at the data and what data is being changed and what field level data is being changed and what it was before and what it was changed to. So we'll talk about those applications as we go through and discuss some of the risk that auditors have identified that they want our clients currently to be monitoring within the application. Now this is just kind of a high level list of the things that our clients have come back to us and said that their auditors are looking for. It could be internal or external, and we got to make sure that we have some way to accommodate this within our application. So going through these quickly, and then we'll go into how we handle each one of these. So it's improper role design. So that would be, do you have roles that have security classes in them that have more than inquiry access or have more access to something that a user should actually have? And are we assigning conflicting roles to users? Meaning, do they have a role that could violate SOD policies? So how are we going through our role design and how are we actually assigning those roles to users? And then we get into privileged access. So this is where IT users may have access to back office applications for support purposes, but we have to know what they're doing. Or do we have end users that have access to IT applications, so could they be changing their own security? Those type of things we have to monitor. Then we have generic user IDs. So a shared user ID is something generally that is not looked on lightly. So we want to track where the activity is coming from. So if somebody's sharing an ID and it's coming from different areas around without your facility, so your network might track the IP addresses, then we can tell you that we have logins coming from multiple IPs, and so we probably have a shared ID out here. So then we get into user administration, where it's how are we auditing user changes, the role changes, combination of roles that might cause SOD policies, and that takes us right into the segregation of duties. So people who have too much ability to carry out certain end-to-end functions. So we want to make sure we identify what policies are currently potentially being violated, and then how do we prevent those? And if we are going to allow those, how do we monitor really what's going on so we are aware of policies that are in violation, and we want to track the people that have that much capability within the system. And then, of course, change management is going to be any changes to security. We have to know about those, and we have to have notifications. They're going to generally, our clients are always going through some periodic access review. We'll have to run a series of reports to turn over to their auditors. So we have accumulation of reports that our clients are currently running that they can just simply go in and run or have scheduled to run that are then emailed or turned over to their auditors. And then configuration access, where somebody can actually go in and change the configuration of whatever it might be within user role assignments or so let's look at improper role design and provisioning. So I don't want to read all these slides to you, but what we're really looking for here is the roles need to be aligned with what's going on in the organization and not just tuned to a specific person. And we see a lot of that where a role is built for a person and not for the job. So poorly designed roles, and what happens is that you can't really come back and share those often because they're built around one person. So what they do is they lead to a lot of segregation to duties problems and access being over granted to users. So we do some things. We have some reports where we want to be able to run to make sure that if a role says it's an inquiry role and it has something more than inquiry access and a security class assigned to it, we need to identify that. Right? So that type of functionality we need to look at. So we'll have 3 reports here specifically looking at role design. So it's going to be our role security class report. And then if there's questions about what's in that security class, we can go all the way down to the object report. Most people are concerned about the form level. So what level of access do they have at the form? And then we want to check to see if roles have SOD violations. So before we worry about a user violating a policy, we want to make sure our roles don't violate our policies. Because if they do, as soon as you assign them a user, that user is in violation. So those reports would look something like this on our dashboard. So everything is browser-based. It's going to come back in IE or Chrome. So there's no third-party products you have to bring in to run this. So if I were to look at one of our simple role security class reports here, I can see I have a role called AP Setup Inquiry, but what's in question here is I have a security class called AP Setup. So this is somewhat suspect here, and maybe AP Analysis, because that implies that there might be more than inquiry capability here. And we see this kind of thing throughout different security models. So what I really want to do is I want to drill into this. With our reporting, you can drill into AP Setup, and we can see actually how is that defined within our application. So the class AP setup, I see the forms, and I see out to the right, I see the rule that's assigned. And in this case, it's all access. So this is really a case of a bad assignment. This security class probably should not be in the AP setup inquiry. There should be an inquiry capability access to these screens, and that's actually a utility we have that would allow you to change or take AP setup and copy it into an inquiry only security class where we assign the rule as being all inquiry. Now, if I want to know maybe where AP setup also is assigned to other than setup inquiry, I can drill up through the model and I can see that AP setup is actually assigned to 3 roles: AP setup inquiry, AP supervisor, and financial supervisor. So within our application, our reporting application, we can drill up and down through the model. So I can see the detail behind what's in a class, or I can see where else a class is assigned. I could actually drill on the role here and drill up to see what users are assigned this role. Now, the second part of this role provisioning and making sure we have the proper role design is to check to make sure it adheres to our SOD policies. So I have a role here, AC Expert, that I'm going out and doing a test on in our SOD application. So we deliver these policies, we deliver the rules. They're all built at the form level. So you see here in asset management, I have a rule that policy number 1 is initiate disposal of fixed assets, conflicts with reconcile fixed assets. So if we have a user that has more than inquiry only access, because inquiry is fine with us, we just don't want add, change, delete capability. So in this case, I have a role, AC expert, that has access to AM 145 and AM 20.5. And for this particular rules behind this policy, that's a violation because it's all access on both. So if I were to assign this AC expert role to any individual, they're already going to be in violation of some of my policies. So we'll give you the ability to check your roles as they are individually, or any combination of roles as you're going to put them together, to see if I were to assign a user these three roles, does that create problems? So before you actually start making these assignments to users, you can be proactive to see whether or not they pass your SOD test, and the combination of them pass the SOD test. So let's look at the second thing, which is privileged access. So this is where we don't want IT to have too much access to the system, and if they do, for they need it for support reasons, we need to monitor what they're doing, right? So they need to manage security, but they really shouldn't have access to business transactions, again, unless they have to for support. So what we've done is we want to look at some reports to see what level of access they have, and then we want to look at monitoring to see if we are going to give them that access to, say, HR functionality, let's monitor what they're doing. So the user role report will tell me what roles they have. If I see issues there I'm concerned about, we can go to a more detailed report on that and get down to the rule level. But then I want to monitor at a high level what they're getting into and what they're actually working on. And if they're doing inquiries in HR, that's probably for support purposes, and that's okay. But if they're doing changes, I may want to know what they changed. And that brings us back to the auditing functionality. So I can go pretty deep into know what is being done within the application and what's being changed. So you might need one, or you might need all of these. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at how is their access assigned. So I have a power user Lawson, and I can simply look at the roles they have assigned using the user role report. And I see down here that they have things like HR director and HR generalist. And I also see they have super admin role, which gives them all kinds of capabilities. So I just want to run a quick report of the user role access. Now, if I'm concerned about any particular user, I can go into more detail. I can look at more detail. This is the role AC accountant. I can look at all the classes that are assigned to AC accountant and the form and the rules assigned to them. So if you want to confirm that maybe, again, something should be inquiry and we're giving them more functionality than we thought they had, or why do they need access? Why do they have this role? The Lawson account doesn't really need the AC accountant role. We can see what kind of access we're giving them. So we just want to have the tools to check all this information. Now, if in fact we have to give that to them, then what we're going to do is we want to monitor their activity. So this is our activity monitor screen, and you can see here I have a user, I have the form that they've worked on, I have the function code they initiated, the date and the time, and the key to that record. So if it's an employee, I know which employee ID it was, I know which vendor, I know which PO, I know any of the key to any form of the 75 or 7,000 forms in Lawson. I have that information, so I know where they've been and what they've been doing. There's no rules that you need to set up behind this. We'll just track all this as it's going through the application, and this would include anything that comes from an add-in. So if they're doing updates through an add-in, we'll pick up all that activity as well. Now, if I need to know what they've done within any particular form, I can go to a more detailed view and look at transaction auditing. This will come back and actually tell me exactly what field was changed on that form. So in this case, I have HR 11.1. A change was done on 1/9 to employee 103, and it looks like their pay down here was changed from 132,000 to 152,000, and their department was changed from 1040 to 5,000. So this is just within HR 11, but again, I can do this on any form in Lawson. So if you have GL journal entry changes, if you have PO changes, any master file changes, any transactions that all changed, we know the before and after value and when it was done. So that's what we want to look at. If we've given all this access to IT, we got to make sure we know what they're doing. So then let's look at privileged access. So this is where end users provision with access to IT applications. So we don't want a regular user to be able to get in and change security, right? That wouldn't make much sense. So we have to see who has all this privilege. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at a user role report and a security audit report. So what we have to track is, do we have any users that are a super admin role? And do we have any users that can get in and actually make changes to security? So we don't want that to happen. So I can easily run a report that gives me, if I go into the RM profile, I can isolate it just down to those users that have the super admin role, which you need to know, because that really is going to give you full privileges within Lawson. So that's an important thing to know, and we have that within just a user role security class report when we do that within the RM profile. Now we can also look at changes. So if a user were to go in and make a change to their security model, and they changed their roles and maybe added a role on, we have to know who is getting in, making changes. So we know the user that made the change, we know the user was affected, and we know the before and after values. So here's a case, there's a role change. These are the previous role assignments. These are the current role assignments. So, and this could be at the user level, like this case, it impacts F. Nelson, or it could be down at the role security class form level. Any detail that changed in the security model, we want to track that information. So we do this both for S3, which is this screen, and for Landmark as well. So we know all changes that happen within Landmark also. So then we get into generic user IDs. And this is where, like I mentioned before, we don't want people to share an ID and be using it from multiple workstations. So on our activity monitoring application, we track the IP address. So if I go out and run a report at any one point, if people are sharing the user Lawson in this case, I can see that it came from multiple IP addresses, which is kind of a red flag for me. Is why do I have so many different transactions? Is it really somebody walking around to different computers doing this work, or do I have people sharing a user ID? We don't really want that. Your auditors are not going to want just that shared ID. So we'll track the IP address so you know, is this an issue you have to be concerned with? Now, user administration, right? So we've done all this other work, but we need to keep an audit trail of all the activities. So new user assignments, modifying existing users, disabling users, that type of information. And then we want to look at combination of roles, like I discussed before, where we might have certain SOD issues. And so a lot of people may only have customers have one primary role, and then they have their batch roles and some other their roles that are not specifically for doing functionality, but they're more for print jobs. But if you have users that have actual role combinations, we need to put those roles together to make sure they're not breaking our policies. So we'll look at security auditing. So we're tracking all of this through user administration, everything that's being done, and we've talked about that before. SOD, which is the user reporting, and then user modeling. So we've talked about the security audit reporting. So this is that same screen we showed before, where any changes made to a user, we have to user administration, we have to track those. And this would be for the Landmark side. So those that are running Landmark applications now, you want to make sure you track changes to your security model. Now, Landmark has some of that functionality built in. We will actually harvest out that data and put it into a format that you can run more ad hoc queries and send email notifications on. Plus, you don't have to have access within Landmark to the security auditing application. You can pull this out of our application, and that user isn't necessarily provisioned for it within Landmark. Then we want to look at user role assignment. So this is the SOD report that comes out by user. So you'll see here I have Frank Nelson, and it's on a payables policy 315, which is maintain a fictitious vendor and create a payment to that vendor. So we don't want somebody to have that level of access. So we're checking to see, does this user have access to the forms that could do that, and what level of access do they have? And if it's more than inquiry, it's a problem. And if they have, in this case, I see they have all access to the forms I'm concerned about. They can do vendor maintenance, they can do invoice entry. It's a conflict for us. So we're going to report that back on you. Now, anywhere within our application here, when you see anything that's blue, this link, you can link right into our reporting. So I can see, give me all the security classes AP 10.1 lives in, or show me how AP maintenance is configured so I can see all the forms that are in AP maintenance. So we can drill throughout the security model from right in our SOD application, potentially to figure out how do we resolve these problems. Now, the other thing we can do here is simulation. So what we want to do is, before we make changes to somebody's role assignments, or maybe even assign the new role to them, we want to do a couple things. We could simulate what's going to happen. So I can go into an application we have and say, what if I added AP supervisor? And that's kind of why it's in green here on the screen. If I add AP supervisor to this user, how does that change their level of access? Excuse me. So what I'll see is anything in green, and my user here is F. Nelson I ran this for. Anything in green tells me that's new access that they're going to get by you assigning AP supervisor to them. If it's in blue, it's a change of access. So it could have been that you've given them more privilege to a form they already had inquiry to, but now you've given them maybe all access to. So it's going to show up in blue, indicating that they already had access, but you're changing their access. And if you've done something where you've removed a security class from a role or removed a role from a user, we're going to show in red what you've removed access from. So you can actually go through and look at all your tables, all your forms, all your programs, categories, and those are all different tabs at the bottom of the spreadsheet to see what the change would be if you were to add, or how your security is going to look if you were to make that change. You can also then, if you like what you see, you can test it against the SOD policies. So now you may say, okay, that's the security I want to give F. Nelson. This looks good, but I need to test that first. So let's run this simulated assignment against our SOD policies to see if that creates any problems. Because that's really what we want to do. If we have a model that's already adhering to our policies, we don't want to break that by just assigning a role to someone and all of a sudden we have a problem with this user. Which takes us to SOD, right? So this is that idea of we got to manage the risk. We got to know, do people have enough security to cause or to create a fraudulent transaction within the application? That's really what we're trying to do here. And in those cases where you have given that level of access and you need to, we should be monitoring what's going on with those users. So we have a couple things here to help you with not only identify, and we've talked about the SOD violation report, but we also have a thing called a remediation grid, which will indicate to you the level of risk based on what users are actually doing in the application. So as I mentioned before, we deliver 240 or 50 or 60 policies. We were changing these on a regular basis. I'm not sure exactly what our count is right now. That you can modify, you can rate them on their level of importance, you can deactivate them, you can add as many new policies as you want. We deliver them all at the form level, but they can be built at different object levels. So you can check to make sure a person doesn't have two different roles, or make sure they don't have this role and role A and security class B. You can build your own that way. But because all Lawson clients start with the same forms, we can actually build out these rules for you at the form level. So this is that rule I think I showed before where can you maintain vendors and can you process invoices? Well, there's at least 3 different ways to maintain vendors, and there's 5 or 6, 7 different ways to process invoices. So we have like 21 different combinations. We have 20, maybe there's 24 combinations here we need to check. So we'll check for any combination. So if the user has AP 10.1 and AP 20.1, that's a violation if they can make changes. So you don't have to have access to all of these. You have to have any combination is really a problem. So if you can enter a vendor, you can enter basic invoice, we don't like that. Now when we run that report, this is similar to what we had a couple screens ago where I come back and I show you the user does violate that policy and here's why. So this at least identifies where we have our problems. You can turn a report over to your audit team and say, okay, we've identified these people. We know they violate these, but we're going to monitor their activity to make sure they're not doing anything wrong, because I have to give them, I don't have enough people to really separate these roles or these duties, so I'm going to let this person have it and monitor their activity. But what we can also do though is look at the level of risk that you might have based on their activity. So a green indication here, so my users are in the first column, and all of my policies that I want to run this for are lined up across the top of the screen. And what we're doing here is if it's green, that tells me that user does violate that policy, but they're not using the forms that are assigned to that rule. So in the prior example, they've never done vendor maintenance and they've never done an invoice entry. They have security to do that. They just haven't used the form, so they're green. If they've used a form on one side of the grouping, so they've done vendor maintenance but never done an invoice, technically to us, that's fine, except they security-wise, they violate the policy, but they're not doing anything wrong because they're only using a form on one side. So probably lower risk, even though it's something I should address. Red tells me that user has actually done, in this example we're using, has done vendor maintenance, has done invoice entry. Now, I don't know they're doing anything wrong, right? We can't apply anything there. I don't even know if they're doing an invoice for a different vendor than what they did the maintenance on. But I can see that through this application. So by the ability, we give you options to drill into more detail from any one of these violations to see, okay, now they do violate this. I see that Lawson on policy 157 is red. If I click on the red, it takes me to a deeper dive into the screen and shows me what they've been doing, what forms are causing the violation, and actually gives me some modeling capabilities to say, how could I change this? So maybe I only give them inquiry only on maintenance. Would that solve my policy violation? So we give you using that simulation and the modeling, we give you the ability to create some scenarios on how to resolve your violations, and especially when you get back to these ones that are red. But it's a nice high-level overview of where do I really need to attack this problem? Because if I just look at it for every violation that's out there, you're probably going to see a lot of green on this screen, but you're going to find that people are not using the forms they have access to. Some cleanup potentially needs to be done, but it's, again, it's probably lower risk than those that are red. So these users that have the ability to carry out end-to-end. So this is, again, back to the SOD, and we need to make sure that we're tracking all this as well. Right? So what we want to do is we want to look at our role modeling, our violation report, and our activity monitoring to make sure we're monitoring all this activity that we just talked about where people might actually be performing these functions that we don't want them to be in. So the role modeling is going to, we talked about this a little before, where I can actually go out, create simulation. These are preventative controls now. So what I'm trying to do is, before I make these assignments, I want to check what's going on. So we talked a little bit about how we can do the modeling, and I can add a role, remove a role, change the security class to a role assignment, and I can see everybody that's impacted by that change and what their security is going to be, and I can check that against my SOD policies. We can, again, also run, this is a role test versus at the user level. So now what I want to do is I've got a role changed. I want to make sure that that role or a combination of roles adheres to my policies, so I can do that with our SOD reports. So again, preventative, where I've set up a new role and I want to test that role, we can do that. And then if we do allow that, I want to monitor activity. So we've kind of talked about all this, but these are just different categories. So I'm using very similar reports from time to time on going back to a particular issue that we're trying to solve. So a lot of these will help you, the monitoring will help you resolve a number of different conflicts, including how we track and determine level of risk on the SOD remediation grid. So let's look at security change management. So now this is any changes to the security model, right? And we've talked about this a little bit too, and you've seen how we're using some of our tools. They apply to more than one area within this access management, kind of our risk and controls. The security auditing will address 2 or 3 different issues. The user role report addresses a couple issues. So whereas we have our security reporting, we have like 40 different reports, we can generally hit on what auditors are looking for in one of those reports. So we want to look at change management. So we want to monitor all the changes to the security model and every object change and role change, and then we really probably want to put notifications on critical changes. So we do a couple different things here. One is security audits, and we've talked about that, and one is a security comparison reports that we haven't really discussed yet. So we've shown this screen a couple times. So this is our monitoring tool for what changes in security, and I can put notifications. So if you're worried about a rule change on HR 11.1, if anytime that happens, I can send an email notification out and say, hey, HR 11.1 was changed in this security class. You ought to be aware of this. So I can see what users are impacted by that. So we can monitor all those and actually have these notifications sent out. And this is both the S3 and the landmark screens. So what we do with security changes on a historical basis is I take snapshots of my security model, And I can go back and run reports from any point in time snapshot. So if somebody were to say, what did my security look like 6 months ago? If I had scheduled snapshots to run, every quarter or every month, I can just look at what my security, how the assignments were made for the user level, role, class, exactly what my security looked like at that point in time. So that's nice if you're trying to say, boy, when did something, we have some change here. I don't know what happened. It used to work. It doesn't work now. You could dig through all the audit logs, or you could just go back and look at what your security looked like then. Well, to identify really maybe what changed, I can compare my current security to that snapshot that I created and tell you what has changed over that period of time, either at the user role level. This is actually user role security class. I can see role security class object. It wouldn't matter which one of my reports. I can see what has changed. So in this case, I can see that I've added certain roles and security classes to William Suez, but I've also removed, and I see the right column, and that's all the column headers with an H, means historical. I've actually deleted access to certain roles for other users. So if you just want to check user role assignments and say, the accountants want to know just what's changed since their last review at the user role level, I can turn a report over to them and say, these are all the users that had these roles added, these are all the users that had these roles removed, and all they got to do is check the deltas and not go through all the detail again. But it gives you a more structured look at how does it impact my security model versus looking through the detail of audit logs and trying to put it all back together. Then the last thing, or the last couple things we do here, is the periodic, the review. So you're going to have these on probably, a couple times a year, at least once a year. So without showing all these reports, we'll do that in the demo. We'll go through and run a number of different reports that auditors like to have. And a lot of those are just the user role or the comparisons. Some of those are like login reports, inactive user list, users that don't have activity. We have all these reports pre-built in the system, and we'll do some of that in the live demo. And then finally, it's the system configuration. So this is the last of the bullets of what are the major risks. And this is where we just have to have controls to restrict access to the applications, which allow users to modify, system configuration. So if somebody is in there making changes, we better know what they're making changes to, and that's what the auditing would tell us. The detailed access report is really our user role security class detail that says who has access to that information. So we want to first identify who has access to it, then we want to audit, in fact, who is making changes. So with that, let's jump over to the live presentation, and I'll go through some product, and then we'll just wrap this up. All right, so this is our security dashboard you'll see across the tabs here, transaction auditing, the monitoring, in some cases, some old LAUA reporting, the LS reporting, and you'll see landmark, SOD, analytics, and admin. So this is our LS reporting. So within this screen itself, we'll have the reporting and the modeling applications and security auditing. Now, I'm not going to get through all these today, but I just want to give you an idea of security reporting. So let's go ahead and go in here. And this is the dashboard just for reporting. So if I want to look at the user role report, I can simply click user role here. I can also always do filtering. So I can do different operands for, I want users that equal this or start with this or contains, we know how that works. Or I'll go to advanced, I get a list of users. I can shift and click and hold down and select a range. I can control and I can pick different individuals. And you can do this for all the reports, whatever you want to filter on. I'm going to go ahead and put all. But I could do it on, if I only wanted particular roles, I could just pick the role I want to work with and see who has those assignments. But otherwise, let's just go ahead and run this. And this is a simple user role report. So you'll see we can drag these out, make them a little bigger. So I have a list of my users and the role assignments, simple enough. What we can do with these reports, though, is I can group these by user, and I can now see A. Davis has 8 roles. So I get a quick count. B. Thomas has 17 roles. Expand it, and I can see the 17 roles B. Thomas has. Well, a lot of times you want to look at this a different way. So you might say, really what I want to do is I want to know all the users assigned to a certain role. Well, I could come down here and I could put a filter on the role and only look for that one role. I could have put that role on the initial criteria at the top when I pulled it in. Or the other thing I can do here is I can group it by role. So if I group by role and I sort by role, I now see AC Accountant has 8 users assigned to AC Accountant. And I see AC Data Entry has 4 users assigned to data entry. I can also then drill on these. So if I want to know what security classes are assigned to this role, this will just open up another sheet in my browser, and it'll drill to the security classes assigned to this role. If I show my search criteria up on the right here, you see we just simply pass through the filter for what role we're looking for. So I could actually come back here and say, you know what, I want to see all role assignments. Let's run that again. So here's all role security class. I'll group it by role, and I can see AC Accountant has 10 security classes, and I can do the same thing I did on the user level. I can group by security class, sort by security class, and I can see AC Analysis is assigned to 5 roles. And if I want to climb up through the model, I can say, who are my people assigned financial supervisor? And I'll open up again another browser tab, and I have 2 users assigned to that role. So I'll just close these out and kind of go back to where we started. But that's the simple way to just see user role assignments. So if I were to go much deeper, and let's say we go down to user form, this is just more powerful because I have more detail. So all the same technology is built in here. So I can do the same grouping. I can group it up, sort it by user, group it by user, role, security class, and I can expand this. A Davis has 6 roles. The AC Accountant role has 9 security classes, and in AC Budgets there are 10 forms. And out here to the right, I see the forms, the available function codes on that form, and the rule assigned. So we're always going to give you the available function codes because sometimes you'll see all access. You're not quite sure what does all access mean. So we want to give you the function codes. So sometimes you'll have all access on a form that only has inquiry capability. So we'll make sure that we tell you what's all access. Now let's also look at this if I invert the model the other way. So if I were to go by form, maybe I'll come up here and put on form, and I don't want to completely invert it. I just kind of what I call flatten it out. So I just want to know what users have access to a particular form. I'm going to come over here and I'm going to put in contains HR11 and a filter. And now I see HR11.1. There are 4 users that have access to that form. And S. Christian actually has 4 different ways to get to that form. And I can see here through the roles and the security classes, HR11.1 and what level of access. And in this case, because we know least restrictive access wins, I know that this user is actually going to get all access because that's going to win over a conditional rule and over an inquiry rule. So I can see the different ways users can get access to a form. I can go up and easily see completely inverted where I might want to say role form security class role, and now I see HR11.1 is in 4 security classes, and in HR setup it's assigned to 3 different roles, and HR director is assigned to 3 different people. So now I've actually built the structure back into it, but I flipped the model upside down. So we can do all that type of thing from within any of the reports that you're seeing back on this screen. So you see there's a lot of reports here which I can't go through today, but we have 5 or 6 different matrix reports which give you a high-level overview of user role assignments. So instead of looking at this detail, we can just look at a grid here of the users, all of my roles, what the assignments are. I can click on any one role and have it sort, and all these people have this role. We can also drill into that detail and say, okay, tell me more about this role, tell me more about this user. I can drill to my other reports. So you'll have matrix reports on a lot of these different levels of objects, but of course you always have the role reports, and we have all objects. So what I've shown you right now are primarily forms, but we also have you can report at the table level, you can categories, securable types. I can actually go in here and I can pick out, do an advance, and any one of these types I can report on. So if I want to know my table access, I should insert it, run my table report, and we'll see here's all my table access for all my roles and security classes. And you can do the same thing where you can sort it by that, and you can group it by that object, and you can see everywhere that object lives, right? So again, we can do that for everything here. Your primary ones here are user role security classes. Now, there's some things down here for unlinked. These are like orphan objects. You have a role built but didn't assign it to anybody. You have a security class, never assigned it to a role. You have forms out there that have never been on a security class, that type of thing. Also here, what we do, if you have the Lawson's HR payroll system, we can do things where we'll pull data out of your employee record. So I can give you um, active users with no employee record. So that would be a consultant, might be a user that has access to Lawson but is not an employee. Many times auditors want to know who has access to your system but they're not an employee of the organization. Or we have active users with a termination date. Okay, why are they, if they have a termination date, why are they still active? So we have this disabled flag now within, as an attribute within Lawson Security. If your user is disabled, they're going to show up on this disabled user attributes and identity list up here, but they're going to be filtered out from every other list, which is different than what Lawson does. I think right now in their standard reporting, they keep all those users in there. We filter them out, but we'll still allow you to create reports based on who those disabled users are. Now, I can't get into everything over here, but the monitoring tool, we call our listener. We build the data to view the data also into this application. So we have a number of things down here on the right that allow you to see that information. So I can see the last login or last time they used the system, users that are set up in the system that have never used it before. But for today's purposes, what I want to look at is just the user form detail. Now, there's a lot of ways I can filter out this data based on the user, the form I'm working on. I want to know what the date, the time. This is the date, access date. So anybody that accessed a certain form in the last 2 weeks, I know, and I can search on certain keys. So if I want to know employee 103 or vendor Kinsey, I can search all of my data for anywhere vendor Kinsey shows up. So it'll show me POs, invoices, vendor master, whatever it might be. So you can always search what we call cross keys to look for a particular piece of information you're looking for. But if I just run it outright here, I'm going to get it just basically a data dump of the user, the form, the function code they initiated, and the key to the record. And you see out here to the right, what I should do here is I'll go to something like let's contains HR11 again. And I'll filter this down, and now I see a number of the function codes, next, change, inquiries. So maybe what I want are just changes. So now I have changes on HR11, and I see the key to the record, which is the employee out here to the right. I see the user that performed these. I could group this by user, and I see F. Nelson did 2 changes, Lawson did 27 changes. Again, same technology here, capabilities of this application where I can group it by any one of these fields and see what activity is going into this change. So, and if I have the activity, if I have the transaction auditing application, I can also look into the detail out here at the right icon to say what in fact did they change. So by clicking on this, and I'm not sure in this case I'm going to get a good piece of information, it's going to launch transaction auditing. I can say I want more details behind this. Maybe what I want to do, I'll go to advanced here and say only show me what actually changed. And we'll see if we get, so in this case, it's a bad example. But if I had another one here of what actually changed on this, I'd be able to click here and see the detail behind this information. So let's go back here. So that's the listener application. I want to make sure we're checking my time here. Okay, so we have a few more minutes. So that's the S3 reporting. Now you're going to have very similar on the landmark side. So now I'm back on my landmark server, and you'll see I have actors, roles, security classes, and Lawson does a better job this time around, Infor did, of providing reports for you. But we're going to give you all that same capability of scheduled emailed reports. We're going to give you historical reports and comparisons. We give you actually a different way we break down the LPL, the pattern language, and the way you can see that as you go through and work in security. So if I were to look at something like, again, we'll parse out the LPL for you, but if I look at role security classes, you're going to see, similar to what we did on the S3 side, only now a business class is in essence similar to what you'd call a form in the traditional Lawson product. So a business class might be vendor or might be employee. And so here I see my roles, my security classes, my objects, and we have, it's this pattern language that instead of reading as a paragraph, we break it out into what is it, what objects are included, what is the rule, what's the exclusion rule. But at any point, you can right click on this and look at the full LPL and read that out in paragraph form on your screen. And we also allow you to search this LPL. So if you're looking for employee in a certain, to see where that's used in a certain security class, you can search through that here. So I could type in the word actor here and it'll highlight. And I can also shrink it up to, well, in this case it's on every one, to just the class, the business classes that contain actor. So it makes it, because some of these paragraphs get exceptionally long and you want to filter that up to just what you're looking for. So again, we have this, same grouping capabilities, and this is all in the landmark application now. So if you're looking for a certain object, what roles does it belong to? This object is in these different roles, and again, and security classes as well. So the landmark reporting gives you this, and we also just build in some capabilities for really developers of the LPL that's going within your security application for relationships. So it gets somewhat challenging within the Lawson application, or the landmark applications, to determine the relationships when you're trying to pull data out to build security on it. So we built an application down here we call in our system that actually helps you identify the relationships and how the fields are connected. So you know when you want to pull a certain piece of information and you want to secure something maybe based on a department, then we can tell you how that relates to the other fields and the other business classes and security classes within landmark. So I'm probably running close on time here, 47 minutes. So it's difficult, again, to get through everything. This is our segregation to duties reporting and our SOD remediation, the grid that I showed. I wanted to give you a little bit of feel for how the security reporting worked and the landmark and the S3. So these SOD reports are simple to run. We can go in and we can I can just create a new report here up on the right, and I can tell it maybe I want to run this for landmark or I want to run it for LS, and we can check which category we want to run it against. We can rate our policies. So if you want to only run for your 5-star policies, we'll say LS, and I only want the 5-star policies. Those are most important to me. We'll filter that down to just those policies, and then you can either save this report, and maybe I only want the 5-star closing policies, right? So I'd uncheck these, and I'm telling it I only want 5-star of these categories. I can save that report, and when I run that, it'll tell me either by policy who violates it, or it'll tell me by user what violations that they have. So I won't go into any one of those, but we saw the screenshots on how those work. Right? And that would, again, be for both landmark and for S3. You do the administration of those policies back here on the SODs under our admin panel, and this is where you can build your own, or you can modify existing policies, and this is where you would rate the policies. So if this is a very important policy, I'll give it a 5-star and a 5-star. We have the different disciplines here: assets, cash, closing. You'll see all the way across. And no limit here on how many of those you can set up, or the number of policies that you can add. So you can manage all these policies yourself, and then when you run reports, again, you can set up email notifications for what actually has, who's actually violating critical policies. So once you have your model in line, what you want to be able to do is have an email notification goes out if a policy gets violated based on some security change that might have happened overnight that you weren't aware of. So we ought to be maybe running these once a week on the critical policies, and if there's a violation, you'll get a notification. So that's really all the time we have today. I didn't have a lot of time to go into transaction auditing, but you kind of saw a little bit about if we have to monitor the detail, how I can go in, and I can look at actually, I can look at all the user Lawson has changed what in the application or done what in the application. This will do a search and pull back, and I have a lot of Lawson activity, so it's probably going to pull back a lot here. It'll come back and give me anything Lawson has done within my application. Of course, I'm not getting anything. So that's really about all the time we have. We talked about transaction auditing, the monitoring. I didn't really have a chance to get into the modeling, but we certainly can set up a presentation for your team if there's some reporting you need to do, SOD, monitoring for Landmark or for VS3. We can do this whether or not you're running V10 cloud, Landmark cloud, can be single tenant, can be multi-tenant. There's a lot of ways for us to get this data. So an on-premise, and most of our accounts are on-premise, but these applications work on all the cloud too. So you can even keep the server to run our applications on-premise and have Lawson in the cloud. All those configurations work. So again, thank you for your time. Hopefully this is informative and helped you out a little bit, and we can get into more detail as we discuss this with you offline and maybe me tune a presentation to what your team is looking for. Thanks for your time.